I want to discuss a possible question in ethics, H5732, the ethics paper this summer, which critically contrasts Aquinas and Freud's theory of conscience. Now, Aquinas argues for two ideas in his theory of conscience. One is Synderesis and the other is conscientia. Synderesis is the innate, that means we're born with it, the innate sense of rational goals which we are to pursue. Aquinas calls it the intuitive knowledge of first principles, which is the 5 primary precepts: preservation of life, ordered society, worship of God, education and reproduction, spelling the word power to help us remember it. Now, these general goals, these teleological goals, have actually to be translated in practice into practical decision making, and that is the role of conscientia. And Aquinas calls this reason making right decisions. So this idea of conscience as being a judgment that we make on the ground in practical situations where very often two moral goods can come into conflict and we need to make a choice between them. Freud, however, has a theory which is highly deterministic and behaviouristic, because he argues that in early childhood, the influence of our parents, teachers and other authority figures in praising us and blaming us guide our behaviour by creating feelings of guilt. And this is the formation and the effect of the superego. And the differences, therefore, between Aquinas' view, somewhat more optimistic, and Freud's are very marked. Aquinas, as we've said, employs these two ideas: synderesis, the general desire to do good and avoid evil, to orientate ourselves towards good ends, and conscientia, which is the decision that we make using our practical wisdom, our judgment. The general ratio or reason that we have reflects the reasoning and the reason that is inherent in the design of the entire universe, the ratio that's at work because it is a reflection of God himself. And because we're created imago Dei, in the image of God, we have this general reason which translates into a reasoning about moral decision making. And so we work out the secondary precepts that we discuss in natural law theory. Notice that Aquinas assumes freedom, human freedom. And of course it is very hard to prove that we are born with an innate conscience. We have to just assume that, or think that it makes the most sense of what we experience. Human selfishness, of course, and egoism can suggest otherwise, and group pressure, peer group pressure, can also lead to a weakening in our understanding of freedom. Aquinas' weakness is actually Freud's strength, in the sense that Freud gives us a highly deterministic view of conscience. For Freud, the issue is not so much do we have freedom as why do we not have freedom? Because in the formation of the superego in childhood, we are trying to resolve inner conflicts between the passions and desires of the id, reflected perhaps in the screaming baby demanding more food, and the projection of the self, or the reality principle as Freud calls it, which is his understanding of the ego. So as ego and id develop and are in conflict with each other, so the superego is formed to adjudicate, to judge between them. But it is formed crucially in early childhood, in the age of between 3 and 5 years old. And therefore, the consequence of this is that we are guided in later life by often irrational feelings of guilt, dependent on the kind of parents that we have. Moreover, Freud's view is reductionist because humans become programmed animals with no higher calling or higher sense of right and wrong than that imposed by the herd or the group. Freudian theory allows us to be programmed to be quite happy, in a sense, about killing innocent people in war, or quite happy about genocide, because it all depends on the moral quality of the person guiding us as a child. But the evils done by people such as Eichmann, who, if you remember, was tried in 1963 having been kidnapped, tried in Israel in 1963, suggest, to coin Hannah Arendt's phrase, that's A-R-E-N-D-T, Hannah Arendt's phrase, they suggest the banality of evil, that evil is something done without reflection and without any feelings of sympathy, and has a sense, a kind of banality to it. And so it suggests a human being who is programmed and conditioned to behave in a certain way. To conclude, we find two very different and contrasting views about conscience here. Aquinas sees conscience as God-given. It's something we're born with, a general desire to do good and avoid evil, which orientates us teleologically towards those good ends, the primary precepts, and gives us a kind of internal compass. Note, this is definitely not an argument for conscience as a voice of God speaking to us in our head, because we still need reason to work out what we do on the ground in practical decisions, which are often complex and difficult. Aquinas' theory has weaknesses. Human beings can often appear to be selfish and highly malleable and influenced by situations and people around us. Eichmann is indeed a warning to us, whereas with Freud, we have a somewhat more pessimistic view of human nature, which sees us, in a sense, trapped by a kind of conditioning that occurs in childhood, which it's not impossible, by the way, to break free of, but is difficult because the primary guide to our moral conduct, says Freud, is feelings of guilt